essential inevitability of universal law. The great disciplines of the mysteries were based upon the law of cause and effect, just as much as the most common occurrences of living. And all of the great steps and stages of the development of man's inner life, these degrees of development were the results or effects of causes. And the causes had to be right, and they had to be exact, and they had to be complete, or the effects would not be what was required or expected or hoped for. So in the whole theory of man's spiritual growth, all growth arose from the unfoldment of personal integrity. The beginning of all mystical discipline was the purification of the individual's life. Purification did not mean to imply that the individual could get nowhere unless he was spotless. Purification meant that the search for reality had to be genuine. It had to be real. It had to represent a dedication to principle. It certainly had to mean that the common difficulties which beset us have to be met and understood and fulfilled according to the workings of law. And so we have today a great many people who are trying desperately to develop certain extrasensory perceptions. Most of them get in trouble. They get in trouble for many reasons. First, because they do not understand how to develop anything. They have to hope. They have to pray. They have to follow some strange, mysterious pattern and have some kind of faith that it will work. Many times, of course, they are following patterns given them by others. And here we frequently hear the wonderful accounts of the secret instructions that folks have received. And many of these instructions are appalling. They represent the most colossal ignorance and effrontery on someone's part. I've checked a great many of these wonderful revelations of how to develop extrasensory powers, how to become an adept in 5 or 10 lessons, how to look through solid walls and see what's going on the other side, how to multiply the family fortune, make friends, influence people, dominate situations, almost anything you want. But even apart from these, which some folks are a little too smart to fall for anymore, there are these mysterious procedures which are supposed to be shortcuts to the infinite, by which the individual is all the quicker and the more simply directed to some type of illumination or mystical experience. I have tracked down a great many of them. Sometimes they're in pamphlets and literature, sometimes they're carefully guarded secrets, communicated only from one person to another under the most direful obligations. But where did they come from in the first place? Where do these instructions originate? And I have checked a great many of them, and nearly all of them begin in somebody else's psychical aberration. That is the 100% causing ground for most of them. You finally get the individual who apparently was the pioneer in this particular form of the matter. You pin them down as to where they got this secret discipline that was to save the world. Who told them? What secret or ancient society did they belong to? Where was the line of descent on this knowledge? Where did the information come from? In almost every instance, this information was something that had been given to them in a dream. in a nightmare, in a bad moment of some kind. Often it was nothing but a slightly twisted paraphrase of something they had read. But they hadn't consciously taken this thing they had read and passed it on as their own. They really hadn't. But they had been reading about it for some time, and one night they dreamt about it. And it got a few extra flourishes in the processes of the dream, and the next morning a new religion was born. And this is how it started. And people, quite convinced of the sincerity of the source, and the person at the beginning probably actually rather sincere. Everybody in trouble within 6 months. Because the situation was not bona fide, there was nothing. The only way in which the individual could get anywhere with the instructions he was receiving was to develop so powerful an imagination that he had hallucinations of progress relating to himself. He could imagine himself to be illuminated. In fact, if he was real good at it, he could have a dream somewhere also, in which the cosmos opened up and he found himself seated in the midst of the infinite. But the whole thing ended up in a dream. It ended up in a strange, negative, psychic situation. Well, you can say if it made the person happy and didn't do anybody else any harm, and everyone seemed to be getting along a little better than they had before, why upset the apple cart? If that's what they want to believe, that we live in a land where you can believe almost anything you want, why not let them go on believing? Well, if it went along nicely like this and everything remained happy, that wouldn't be perhaps so bad a situation. But it never goes that way. In a very short time, the false doctrines, the false ideas, the stupid situations that arise begin to create complications. The individual who thinks he is illumined insists on illuminating other people. He doesn't know much himself, and by the time it passes on to a number of others, it's worse than when he got it. He begins to have pre-warning of various events. He frightens people to death. He has visions of what is going to happen to the universe, the political system, and the neighborhood. This becomes very complicated. And also, little by little, he becomes a metaphysical aristocrat on his own part. There is this note of infallibility about him. After he's had this a little while, he loses his family, his relatives, and his friends, who cannot put up with this concept of an infallible person who is making as many mistakes as he ever made, but isn't admitting them anymore. The individual suddenly discovers, or doesn't discover, but others discover for him, that he has stepped out of the stream of life's experience. He has new and fancy meanings for everything that happens. These meanings are no longer of any use to him in helping him to grow. As one individual told me, he said, "Why should I experience how to grow? I've already reached perfection." It's a marvelous way to feel about things. But as far as this person was concerned, they were the only one who had the slightest suspicion that they had reached perfection. This same person who was perfect was the same grand old gossip they'd ever been. This person had the same antagonisms, the same prejudices, the same fanaticisms that they had always had. Their temper was just as bad as ever. The only difference is that they had the same faults, but now they were blind to them, and this is no improvement. Or, as one individual explained to me, who had a certain rather bad dispositional problem that they had worked with for a number of years before they had become illuminated, I asked them how they were getting along with this old problem that they had been fighting with for years, and they looked at me